You already know the German child soldiers died. What most people don't realize is who actually pulled the trigger and why they had no choice but to stay. The boys who ended up at those Panzerfaust positions in the final weeks of the war weren't there by accident. And the reason they didn't run isn't what you think. The men who sent them there had already planned their own deaths. Every child who stayed bought them another hour to do it. By 1939, joining the Hitler Youth was not a decision. It was the law. Every German boy between 10 and 18 was conscripted by decree, and parents who tried to hide their sons could be imprisoned. By 1940, the organization had over 8 million members. That is not a club. That is an entire generation locked into a single uniform. But this wasn't scouting. The training was military from the start. Marksmanship, hand-to-hand combat, map reading, live grenade drills. Boys were pulled from school for weeks to dig trenches and practice with rifles. By 14, most could strip and reload a Karabiner 98K blindfolded, and the system fed directly into the Wehrmacht, the SS, or the Reich Labor Service. The state had been preparing these boys to die since they were old enough to read. Songs about glorious death, posters of teenage heroes, films about boys who threw themselves under tanks for the Führer. By the time the war needed them, they'd spent more than a decade being told that dying young wasn't a tragedy. It was the goal. In 1944, the regime was ready to cash in. The first real test came in Normandy, June 1944. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend entered combat for the first time. Around 20,540 teenagers with battle-hardened Eastern Front officers in command. In the 1st Battalion alone, 65% of troops were under 18. Only 3% were over 25, and they were terrifying, not because of skill, but because they would not break. They had been raised to believe surrendering was the deepest shame a German could earn, so they fought like cornered animals. But that same fanaticism produced something darker almost immediately. Between June 7th and June 17th, 1944, soldiers of the 12th SS murdered approximately 156 Canadian prisoners of war. At the Ardennes Abbey near Caen, 20 Canadian prisoners of war were taken into the Abbey garden in small groups and shot in the back of the head. Their commander, SS Standartenführer Kurt Meyer, had reportedly ordered his men to take no prisoners alive. Meyer was convicted of war crimes in December 1945. The Allied troops who found out what these teenagers were doing responded in kind. Some issued orders to take no German prisoners as reprisal, though higher command countermanded them. The boys of the 12th SS came out of the Falaise pocket, having lost 60% of their tanks and more than a third of their men. Their first lesson in what their training had actually prepared them for. Things got worse in October 1944 when Hitler signed the Volkssturm Decree. On September 25, 1944, he signed it in secret. On October 18th, Himmler announced it by radio. The Volkssturm, People's Storm, was officially a militia for men between 16 and 60. In practice, by early 1945, it had become a legal mechanism to throw children at advancing tank columns. Boys born in 1928, 14 and 15-year-olds, were conscripted directly out of the Hitler Youth into tank destroyer squads. According to historian Christian Hardinghouse, the regime used 14-year-olds as stopgaps and cannon fodder. The equipment situation was a nightmare. By September 1944, the German army had already reported shortages of 700,000 rifles and 50,000 machine guns. Volkssturm units were handed captured Czech rifles, Polish submachine guns, and vintage World War I machine guns. Many had no proper uniforms, just an armband. Goebbels' propaganda showed them parading with proper weapons, the part that didn't make the newsreels. After the parades, the rifles went straight back to the depot. The one weapon they did receive in massive quantities was the Panzerfaust, a single-shot disposable anti-tank launcher with an effective range of approximately 30 meters. To use it, a 14-year-old had to creep close enough to a Soviet T-34 to see the dirt on its tracks, stand up, aim, and hope the backblast didn't kill him first. Most of them got one shot. If they hit, they ran. If they missed, they died. However, the most disturbing moment of the entire war was captured on March 19, 1945. That morning, 20 members of the Hitler Youth were brought to the garden of the Reich Chancellery in Berlin. All had been awarded the Iron Cross Second Class for bravery in combat. Goebbels' propaganda ministry had stage-managed every detail: new uniforms, hot showers, a hearty breakfast with table wine, a sightseeing bus tour of Berlin, all of it designed to produce one final piece of inspirational newsreel for a country that was already finished. The youngest boy in the line was Alfred Czech. He was 12 years old. He had earned his Iron Cross by using his father's farm cart to rescue 12 wounded German soldiers under Russian artillery fire, making 2 separate trips into the kill zone. Then Hitler came up from the bunker, his last public appearance ever captured on film. He walked slowly down the line, patting cheeks, shaking hands. His left hand trembled behind his back. He looked at Alfred Czech and asked if he had been scared. Alfred said, "No, my Führer." Hitler said, "Keep it up." That was the entire conversation with the boy he was about to send to die. The cameras stopped rolling. The boys were handed back their Panzerfausts and sent straight to the front. Most of them were dead within 30 days. And that brings us to the part that didn't make the propaganda films, the reason those boys stayed at their posts even when survival was impossible. By March 1945, the Nazi state had created something called the Fliegendes Standgericht, the Flying Court-Martial. Hitler authorized it by Führer decree on March 9, 1945. Each unit consisted of 3 judges who would roll up to the front, hold a trial in under an hour, and execute the verdict on the spot. No appeal, no witnesses required, no right of pardon. They could shoot anyone who could not prove they had orders to be where they were. In the final weeks of April 1945, the SS and the Feldjäger Corps were hanging children from lampposts across Berlin. Witnesses described placards tied around the boys' necks reading, "I am a coward," or "I wanted to deliver the German Reich to communism." A 19-year-old Luftwaffe member named Ernst Klein said it plainly. To desert was never an option. It meant the death penalty. Even white flags were a death sentence. Berliners who hung white sheets from their windows hoping to surrender quietly to the Russians were dragged out and shot. Parents who tried to hide their sons faced the same fate. Witnesses in Berlin recalled SS men knocking on doors during the final weeks, demanding teenage boys, and shooting parents who refused to hand them over. None of that explains why. By late April 1945, Hitler, Goebbels, Bormann, and the rest of the inner circle already knew the war was lost. Cyanide capsules were being passed around in the Führer bunker. Magda Goebbels was preparing to poison her own 6 children, which she did on May 1, 1945. The leadership was choreographing their own deaths down to the minute. But every day Berlin held out was another day to negotiate, plan escapes, or finish the rituals of their own self-destruction. So they used the boys as a delaying tactic. Every Panzerfaust fired by a 14-year-old bought a minute of survival for the men in the bunker. Every Hitler Youth battalion that died at a bridge bought another hour. The leadership knew the math. They simply preferred that the children die first. The Soviets shot them for firing Panzerfausts at T-34 tanks. The SS shot them for stopping. The only exit from the system was death, and the regime made absolutely sure of that. Of the 20 boys who shook Hitler's hand on March 19, 1945, only a handful are known to have survived the war. Alfred Czech was captured by Soviet forces and held in a labor camp until 1947. When he came home, most of the people he'd known were dead or missing. They'd been promised a 1,000-year Reich. They got 6 weeks. If this story changed how you see those final days, subscribe.